The Bible is a very old book, or rather a collection of books. Many people read it for spiritual guidance and religious teachings. However, it is also a fascinating window into the ancient world. Its stories and laws were written down over many centuries. These texts tell us a lot about how people lived, what they believed, and how their ideas about God began to form. The Bible is not just one single story. It contains histories, poems, laws, and prophecies. Understanding its origins helps us see the layers of meaning within it. We can explore how early humans tried to understand the divine. This journey into the past reveals much about our shared human quest for meaning and connection. The Old Testament, known as the Tanakh in Judaism, is the first major part of the Bible. It holds the earliest accounts of what we might call religious practices. These writings are sacred to Jews and Christians, and also respected by Muslims. The Old Testament begins with the book of Genesis, meaning beginnings. This book describes the creation of the world and the first humans. It sets the stage for a long and complex story of God's relationship with humanity. The stories here are ancient, passed down through generations before being written. They reflect the questions early people asked about life, suffering, and the world around them. These texts offer a glimpse into very early forms of belief. When we look for the first religion in the Bible, we don't find a fully formed system like modern religions. Instead, we see descriptions of direct interactions with a divine being. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve are said to have walked and talked with God. Their relationship was personal and immediate. There were no temples, no priests in the way we understand them later, and no complex set of rituals. Their worship was based on obedience to God's direct commands. This early form of faith was about a close, though sometimes challenging, connection with the Creator. It was a simple, almost familial bond. The earliest religious acts described are often acts of communication and response to divine presence. God speaks, and humans are expected to listen and obey. This is seen in the instructions given to Adam and Eve regarding the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The concept of a covenant, or a special agreement between God and people, begins to emerge very early. This idea of a binding promise would become a central theme in the development of biblical faith. The focus was less on organized worship and more on individual or family relationships with the divine. These initial narratives lay the groundwork for more structured beliefs that would develop over many centuries. Adam and Eve are the first human figures in the Bible who interact with God. Their story in Genesis is fundamental. It explains how humanity was created and given a special place in the world. God gave them simple instructions, focusing on what they should not do. Their disobedience led to their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. This event introduced themes of human free will, the consequences of actions, and separation from God. Their relationship with God was direct and personal. Their story sets a pattern. God makes a command, humans respond, and there are consequences. This basic interaction can be seen as the earliest form of religious understanding presented in the biblical text, centered on obedience. After Adam and Eve, their sons Cain and Abel offer another glimpse into early religious practices. The Bible tells us that Cain, a farmer, and Abel, a shepherd, both made offerings to God. Abel offered the best of his flock, while Cain offered some of his crops. God accepted Abel's offering, but not Cain's. This story introduces the idea of sacrifice or offering as a way to approach God. It suggests that the attitude and quality of the offering mattered. The act of giving something valuable to the divine was an early way people expressed devotion or sought favor. This practice of offerings would become a significant part of later religious rituals in many cultures, including ancient Israel. Noah is another key figure in these early narratives of faith. He lived in a time when the Bible describes humanity as having become wicked. God chose Noah because he was a righteous man. God instructed Noah to build an ark to save his family and pairs of every animal from a great flood. This story highlights God's justice, but also God's mercy and desire to preserve life. After the flood, God made a covenant with Noah and all living creatures. This covenant was a promise that God would never again destroy the earth with a flood. The rainbow was given as a sign of this everlasting promise, a visible reminder of God's commitment to the world. The faith of these early figures, Adam, Cain, Abel, and Noah, was not institutionalized. They did not have complex religious laws or established places of worship like temples. Their religious experience was characterized by direct divine communication, simple commands, and personal or familial responses. For Noah, his righteousness was his primary religious expression, leading to God's covenant with him. These stories illustrate a developing understanding of the divine. They show early attempts to live according to God's will and to maintain a relationship with a powerful, sometimes mysterious creator. These narratives formed the bedrock for the more complex religious traditions that would follow. The story of Abraham, originally named Abram, marks a very important turning point in the Bible's account of religious development. He's often called the father of faith. God called Abram to leave his home in Ur of the Chaldees, a city in ancient Mesopotamia. God promised to make him into a great nation, to bless him, and to make his name great. This call required immense trust, as Abram was asked to leave behind everything familiar for an unknown land and an uncertain future. This journey of faith became a central theme. Abram's response of obedience set a new pattern for the relationship between humans and God, moving towards a more defined covenant relationship. God made a formal covenant with Abraham. This agreement was a solemn promise. God promised Abraham countless descendants and the land of Canaan for his offspring. As a sign of this covenant, God commanded Abraham and his male descendants to be circumcised. This physical mark symbolized their special relationship with God and their commitment to the covenant. This covenant was not just with Abraham personally, but with his future generations. It established a lineage of people who were set apart for a specific purpose in God's plan. The idea of a chosen people, bound by a covenant, became a cornerstone of what would later develop into Judaism. Abraham's faith was tested many times. Perhaps the most famous and challenging test was God's command to sacrifice his son, Isaac. This story is deeply troubling to many, yet in the biblical narrative it demonstrates Abraham's ultimate willingness to obey God, even at an unimaginable cost. Just as Abraham was about to carry out the sacrifice, God intervened and provided a ram instead. This event highlighted the depth of Abraham's devotion and trust. It also signaled a shift, perhaps, from literal human sacrifice, common in some surrounding cultures, to a faith based on obedience and trust, with God providing an alternative. This reinforced the idea that faith required total commitment. While Abraham's practices were still largely personal and familial, they laid crucial foundations. He built altars in places where God appeared to him, marking sacred spots for worship. He communicated directly with God, receiving guidance and promises. Unlike the earlier figures, Abraham's story introduces a more sustained and developing relationship with God, centered on promises for the future and a specific lineage. His faith was not yet a religion with a full set of laws or central sanctuary, but it contained many core elements: divine call, covenant, promise, testing, and obedience. These elements would be essential for the later development of Israelite religion. The covenant God made with Abraham did not end with him. It was passed down through his son Isaac and then to Isaac's son, Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. These patriarchs, as they are known, continued the traditions of their fathers. They built altars, called on the name of the Lord, and renewed the covenant promises. Their stories, filled with personal struggles and divine encounters, helped to shape the identity of their descendants. The faith was still largely centered on family and tribe, but the growing number of descendants meant that these practices were becoming more widespread. The narratives of their lives formed a shared history and heritage. The period following the patriarchs, leading up to the time of Moses, saw the descendants of Jacob, the Israelites, grow into a larger group of people, particularly during their time in Egypt. The Bible doesn't provide extensive details about their specific religious rituals during this period of enslavement. However, the memory of the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was preserved. This ancestral faith, based on God's promises of land and numerous descendants, sustained them. It provided a sense of identity and hope, even in difficult circumstances. The core belief in the God of their fathers remained, even if formal worship was suppressed or altered by their Egyptian environment. The arrival of Moses on the scene marks another major transformation in the development of what would become Judaism. The exodus from Egypt, led by Moses, became the central redemptive event in Israelite history. At Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the law, or Torah. This included the Ten Commandments and many other rules governing worship, social justice, and daily life. This was a shift from largely personal and familial faith to a more structured, communal and legally defined religion. The covenant was now made with the entire nation of Israel, not just with individuals or families. The earlier, simpler practices of the patriarchs provided the essential foundation upon which this more complex system was built. In summary, the first religion in the Bible is not a single, static entity. It begins as a very direct personal relationship between God and the earliest humans like Adam and Noah, characterized by commands and simple responses. With Abraham, this evolves into a covenantal faith focused on promise, lineage, and acts of profound trust. These patriarchal practices, while not an organized religion in the modern sense, were the crucial building blocks. They laid the spiritual and historical groundwork for the later development of ancient Israelite religion under Moses, which then evolved into Judaism. Understanding this gradual unfolding is key to appreciating the depth and history of biblical faith.